You wake up tired, again. You label it laziness, but you already suspect it's more complicated. Deep down, there's a whisper, a gnawing truth. Maybe your laziness isn't laziness at all. Maybe it's a symptom, a signal, a hidden rebellion. Because your body is saying what you've silenced for years. Enough. You've been carrying expectations that were never truly yours. Burdens, quietly handed to you by parents, partners, society itself. And now, your will, your vitality has been crushed beneath obligations dressed up as virtues. Nietzsche saw this long before you ever felt it. What you dismiss as laziness is, in truth, the cry of exhaustion. Think about it. You're not tired because you've done too much. You're tired because you've spent your life performing roles that drain the core of who you are. Your exhaustion isn't physical, it's existential. It's emotional. It's the soul-deep fatigue Nietzsche spoke of, the kind that comes from carrying a life that betrays your strength every single day. A life that demands you hide your fire, your hunger, your wildness, until nothing's left but a faint trace of smoke, heavy and suffocating. And that smoke? That's what you've mistaken for laziness. Foucault warned us about this invisible trap. He spoke of the silent disciplinary systems that tame our desires, that chain our energy to norms and rules we never consented to, but absorbed like secondhand smoke. These systems are subtle. They teach you to believe that what they want is what you want, that their values are your values, that their expectations are your goals. Until you stop questioning, you stop resisting, and without even realizing it, you start calling surrender self-care, submission balance, and your silence peace. But those are lies. Lies you've been told so many times that you started telling them to yourself. Remember your hardest days, the days when even simple tasks feel impossible, when you can't muster the energy to text back, or open that email, or answer that call. That isn't rest. That isn't laziness. That's quiet defiance. That's your body, your spirit, refusing to keep playing along. It's the rebellion you weren't conscious of, the fight you've been too tired to join. And instead of listening, instead of honoring that rebellion, you blame yourself. You accuse yourself of being weak. You punish yourself with guilt. But the real question isn't why you feel lazy. The real question is, why have you accepted a life that drains you so completely? Let this truth cut through the fog. You're not lazy. You're exhausted from living a lie, from playing roles that were never meant for you, from wearing masks of goodness, of competence, of morality just to satisfy expectations that have nothing to do with your authentic self. Nietzsche saw this for what it is, self-betrayal, the slow death that comes from denying your deepest instincts in exchange for approval. And Foucault? He saw the chains, the rules so deeply embedded that you mistake them for your own thoughts. This isn't a video to make you feel better. It's here to wake you up. Your fatigue isn't the problem. It's the messenger. Your so-called laziness isn't weakness. It's your suppressed power, pounding at the walls you built around it. The cry of a will that's been humiliated, silenced, and caged. Today, you're invited to see it for what it is. To stop blaming yourself. To start questioning the world that taught you to do so. Because that laziness you hate, that's where your strength has been waiting all along. You wear the mask so well that no one suspects the weight it puts on your soul. Efficient, reliable, the one who never fails, who never says no. And every day, as you play that role, something in you weakens. The split grows deeper. The part that obeys, performs, and achieves, and the part that watches silently as your strength is siphoned away to serve values you never chose. What wears you down isn't the work itself, It's the endless act of pretending. That's the hidden cost of living as the moral persona the world rewards. And what you've been calling laziness, Nietzsche saw it for what it truly is. He recognized it as the cry of exhaustion, the final voice of a will that's been shackled by roles and duties it can no longer bear. The truth is, you inherited this script. Be useful, be selfless, be good. You learned these commands before you even understood you had a choice. And at first, you followed them because that's what you thought strength looked like. But obedience became your poison. Each time you silenced your true hunger to meet someone else's expectation, your fire dimmed. You became skilled at self-betrayal, at pleasing, at performing. And now when your body stops, when it collapses into what you call laziness, it isn't failure. It's the last honest response in a life spent chasing approval at the cost of your own vitality. That heaviness in your limbs, that fog in your mind, it isn't weakness. It's a form of protest, a refusal to continue on a path that empties you out. When the tasks are done and the world praises you, why does emptiness still creep in? Why does the fatigue remain, deeper than sleep can touch? Because it's not about how much you do, it's about who you've been forced to become while doing it. And this is the hidden wound most never see. That your so-called laziness is, in truth, the cry of exhaustion Nietzsche spoke of, the will's last attempt to resist a life that betrays its power. Foucault saw the same prison built by invisible hands, the disciplinary systems that tame your wildness, that whisper rules until you mistake them for your own thoughts, and so you obey without even realizing it. You call surrender self-care. You name submission balance. You label the slow death of your strength as maturity. But beneath that surface, the will you thought was gone is still alive. And its cry, that fatigue, that refusal to keep moving, is what you've been taught to despise as laziness. But the crack in the illusion begins here. Once you see that this tiredness is not your enemy, but your messenger, everything changes. Your fatigue tells the story of the moral persona you were forced to wear, the one that kept you small, quiet, safe, and broken. And if hearing this feels like the first real breath you've taken in a long time, I want to invite you to choose clarity now. Subscribe to this channel, not because you should, but because you're deciding to stay close to what helps you see. And if this truth touches the part of you that's been silent too long, leave a like as a quiet act of rebellion, a signal to yourself that your will is not dead. It's waiting. You've been taught to see laziness as your enemy, as proof of weakness, failure, some personal flaw that you must overcome. But what if I told you that what you're calling laziness is something else entirely? What if it's the disguise your rage had to wear because it was never safe to show itself? Beneath the stillness, beneath the heaviness that keeps you motionless, burns a fire that's been turned inward. That fire was meant to protect you, to guide you, to fuel your will. But over time, under pressure from expectations, from guilt, from duty, that fire was forced to devour its own flame. And so you sit there, exhausted, blaming yourself for what looks like apathy. But Nietzsche saw it differently. He saw that your laziness is the cry of exhaustion, the silent rebellion of a will that was never meant to serve what it secretly hates. There's a kind of rage that has no voice. A kind that simmers beneath layers of compliance, of smiles, of false peace. It's the rage of someone who has been made to follow paths they never chose. The rage of someone who sacrificed their hunger, their wildness, their truth in exchange for approval that never filled the emptiness. And over the years, that rage had nowhere to go. It couldn't erupt, because to show anger was to risk rejection. It couldn't speak, because to speak would mean betraying the role you were forced to play. So it sank deeper. It became hidden, and it began to wear the mask of laziness. You stopped moving, not because you didn't care, but because you couldn't bear to keep moving in directions that erased you. Nietzsche's will to power, that raw force meant to shape and create, has been turned against itself. Your will, instead of building, begins to consume. Instead of reaching outward, it collapses inward. And what the world sees is a person who seems unwilling, unmotivated. But what they can't see is the battle raging behind your tired eyes. A battle between the part of you that longs to rise and the part that's been chained for so long it has forgotten how to stand. What looks like laziness is the weight of suppressed rebellion. It is the soul's refusal to keep serving a master it resents. And every day you sit in that stillness, blaming yourself, you miss the truth. This isn't weakness. This is your spirit's last defense against a life that betrayed it. There is hidden anger beneath your fatigue. Anger at the world for shaping you into something small. Anger at those who imposed their paths upon you. But more than that, anger at yourself for agreeing to the terms. This is the hardest part to face. Because to admit that your laziness is a mask for rage is to admit how long you have been at war with yourself. It's to see clearly that your weariness isn't the problem. The problem is the betrayal that came before the weariness. And once you see that, really see it, the question isn't how to become productive again. The question is, when will you stop calling your cry for freedom a flaw? Every moment you sit there, still and heavy, is a message you've been too ashamed to hear. The message is simple and brutal and true. You were not made to serve what you despise. Your body refuses because your will has been humiliated long enough. Your so-called laziness is not a failing. It's the last, desperate attempt of your strength to remind you who you are. You're told to rest, to take time for yourself, to slow down, breathe, listen to your body. On the surface, these sound like acts of care, like kindness toward yourself. But underneath, something darker often hides, something few dare to name. Because what if the rest you've been told to take is not healing you at all? What if it's become a ritual of stagnation, a disguise for surrender, a velvet chain keeping you exactly where the world wants you, quiet, small, unmoving? You were taught that self-care meant stepping back, pausing, finding balance, but no one warned you how easily this can become an excuse for staying trapped. And in that stillness, you tell yourself it's enough, that it's what you need. But the emptiness lingers because the rest you're practicing is not the kind that feeds strength. It's the kind that starves potential. It's the kind that comforts you just enough to keep you from breaking free. There's a predator hiding in this comfort. A voice that soothes you with soft words, telling you to wait, to pause, to recover. But really, it feeds on your unrealized hunger, on the dreams you postpone in the name of balance. And each time you obey that voice, each time you choose the easy silence over the hard confrontation, you give it more power. You lose one more piece of the fire that could have built, created, dared. What looks like self-care becomes self-erasure, little by little, day after day. And this is how the world tames those who might have dared to rise. It doesn't always chain them with work, with duty, with exhaustion. Sometimes it chains them with comfort, with rest that's no longer a choice, but a cage. You tell yourself you're listening to your body, but your body is still waiting for you to listen to your will, to the part of you that wants more than recovery, the part that wants to rise, to claim, to create, to break. But that part stays silent, buried beneath the rituals of self-care that have become an easy place to hide. And the longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to hear what that part is trying to say. The harder it becomes to tell the difference between true rest, the kind that restores your strength, and false rest, the kind that numbs your hunger. Your so-called laziness, the stillness you've come to see as a flaw, isn't what's destroying you. It's what's left after you've been destroyed by a life that offered you comfort as a reward for your compliance. The cry of exhaustion that Nietzsche named lives here too, in the spaces where you think you're recovering, but you're really retreating. In the moments where you think you're choosing peace, but you're really avoiding the battle you were meant to fight. This is how stagnation wears the mask of care. This is how your will is lulled to sleep by words that sound kind, but serve to keep you small. And so the question haunts the edges of every quiet moment. Is this rest, or is this surrender? Is this care, or is this fear? Is this balance, or is this stagnation? The answer isn't in the rituals you've been taught to follow. It's in what those rituals cost you. It's in the fire that dims each time you choose comfort over courage. The predator of comfort feeds on your forgotten potential, and it leaves you calling it care. There comes a moment when the will collapses. The moment so quiet that you don't even notice it passing. You stop choosing, stop directing, stop acting with intention, and something else moves in to fill the empty space. External forces, invisible structures, the demands and expectations of others take the throne you abandoned. And without realizing it, you're no longer the author of your own life. You're a character in someone else's script, playing out roles designed to keep you useful, harmless, controlled. This is the silent tragedy of laziness as the world sees it. But in truth, what looks like laziness is often the death of authentic direction, the moment the will abdicates and the self becomes a vessel for what it never truly wanted. The world rewards this collapse. It calls you good for staying in line, for fulfilling duties without complaint, for moving through the motions even as your fire fades. But there is no virtue in abandoning your own throne. The will was meant to guide, to shape, to create, and when it lies dormant, humiliated, unseen, what remains is a hollow existence, a life lived on autopilot. The exhaustion you feel in this state isn't a failure of effort. It's the natural result of a will that's been silenced. That's the deeper meaning behind what Nietzsche understood. Your laziness is the cry of exhaustion, the final signal from a strength that's been denied too long. In this collapse, external control doesn't always look like oppression. It often looks like normalcy, like meeting expectations, like being responsible. But beneath that surface, you know the truth. You feel the emptiness that follows every task, the weight that grows heavier, not lighter, after each duty fulfilled, because none of it was chosen. None of it was shaped by a will that's awake. It was imposed, absorbed, accepted without question. And now, that absence of true direction wears the mask of laziness. But laziness is not the disease. It is the symptom, the sign that your will is waiting to be reclaimed. The first act of rebellion begins here, choosing one task, just one, that restores your sovereignty. Not a task to please others, not a duty handed to you by someone else. A task that reawakens the part of you that remembers how to decide, how to shape, how to create. It doesn't matter how small it seems. What matters is that it's yours. Because the will, like any muscle, returns through use. And every choice that is truly yours strengthens it again. The collapse of your inner throne isn't permanent, but only you can rise and take it back. Picture the lion, once fierce, now hollow-eyed and slow. Once a predator, now moving like prey. Not because it was defeated in battle, but because it was taught to forget its hunger. That is the story your so-called laziness tells, not of weakness, but of strength domesticated by duty, guilt, and fear. A strength that was once wild, now trained to ask for permission, to seek approval, to live small. The exhaustion you feel, the stillness that you mistake for failure, is the weight of a will that was born to hunt and was made to kneel instead. What Nietzsche saw, and what the world hides from you, is that your laziness is the cry of exhaustion, the silent roar of a predator who has been made to believe it is prey. Your will wasn't meant to serve. It was meant to command, to build, to shape a life that matches your hunger. But over time, you accepted the cage. Not because you wanted to, but because you were told it was the only way to be safe, to be loved, to be worthy. The bars were invisible at first. They looked like kindness, like responsibility, like balance, and so you stayed. You learned to move less, to want less, to speak less, until the fire inside you seemed to go out. But it didn't. It only waits. And your so-called laziness is the last proof that the fire is still there. That the predator is only sleeping, not dead. The tasks you avoid, the steps you postpone, the projects you leave undone, they aren't signs of failure. They're signs of a spirit that refuses to waste its strength on paths that lead nowhere. A spirit that knows it was made for more. And the longer you ignore that knowledge, the heavier everything feels. What looks like laziness is the soul's quiet protest against a life that asks it to be less than what it is. The work now is not to fight your laziness, not to force yourself to move in directions that suffocate you. The work is to remember. To remember the hunger that once drove you before you were tamed. The hunger that shaped your dreams, your ideas, your courage before you learned to fear your own power. That hunger is not gone. It is hidden beneath layers of guilt and duty and silence, but it is waiting. And the wake you feel, that heaviness you've blamed on weakness, is the cost of forgetting it. The lion that learned to act like prey can remember what it means to be a predator. You can remember what it means to want, to act, to choose without apology. Your laziness isn't the problem. The problem is how long you've been told to see your strength as dangerous, your hunger as shameful, your will as something to tame. But the will does not die. It waits. And when you are ready to stop living as prey, it will rise. You wait for the spark. You tell yourself that when motivation returns, when energy finds you, when the weight lifts, you'll begin. But the days pass, the weeks blur, and still you sit, hoping for the fire to ignite before you move. This is the trap. This is the lie that keeps you still. That action depends on desire, that strength comes first and then movement. But Nietzsche warned of this illusion. He saw clearly what most never dare to admit, that what you call laziness is the cry of exhaustion from a will humiliated into silence, and that the will does not awaken through waiting, it awakens through doing, through the act itself. Your waiting feeds the wake you feel. Every moment you hesitate, every time you postpone, the heaviness deepens. Because the will was not made to lie dormant. The will is action. It's decision shaped into form. And the longer you ask it to wait for some magical surge of energy before it acts, the weaker it seems to become. But this weakness is not real. It is a reflection of inaction. Strength is not something you wait for. Strength is what emerges when you begin, even when you feel empty, even when you feel lost. It is in the act itself that the will finds its voice again. This is the price of waiting for motivation. You begin to believe that you have none. You begin to mistake the natural quiet of a will left unused for the absence of a will altogether. But the truth is harsher and freer. Your will never left. It is only asleep, and it waits for your hand to move, your choice to be made, your step to be taken. It is forged in motion, not in longing. And this is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of the will to power, not as something granted from outside, but as something built by the very struggle to act. The world teaches you to seek the feeling first, to wait until you are ready. But readiness is the enemy of the will, because readiness rarely comes. The fire you seek doesn't precede the act. It is born in the act. When you take that first step, no matter how small, no matter how hesitant, the will begins to remember itself. Action precedes vitality. This is the truth hidden in plain sight, the truth most never want to face. Because it means there is no secret, no shortcut, no waiting for the right mood or the perfect day. There is only the choice to begin. Your so-called laziness is the cry of exhaustion from waiting too long to act. From waiting for permission, for certainty, for strength to appear out of thin air. But strength was never missing. It was only buried beneath hesitation, beneath fear, beneath the lie that you must feel powerful before you can move. The will wakens through its own use. And every moment you choose action over waiting, that will grows stronger. Every choice you make, every task you complete, every step you take, these are the sparks that relight the fire, and the fire feeds itself, but it will never burn if you sit waiting for it to start on its own. There is no perfect moment. There is no right time. There is only this. Act before you feel ready. And in that act, your will, humiliated, silenced, caged, will rise. The strength you seek is waiting at your feet, like the rusted sword you forgot you carried all along. There's a silence that follows you when you stop pretending, a silence that can feel unbearable at first, because in it, you hear the truths you've been running from. The truth that what you've called laziness isn't weakness, it isn't failure, it isn't proof that you are broken. It's the messenger you refused to listen to, the last voice of a will crushed by years of submission, guilt, and forgotten hunger. And it waits. Beneath the fatigue, beneath the stillness, beneath the endless apologies you make to the world, it waits. What Jung saw so clearly, what he tried to show to those brave enough to look. Every time you silence your shadow's cry for power, it binds itself to your fatigue, waiting to ambush your peace. That's what you felt all this time, the weight of your own denied strength, pressing against the edges of your life, demanding to be seen. And Nietzsche named the shape of that cry. He gave it the words no one dared speak. What you call laziness is often the scream of a will humiliated into silence. A will that has been taught to kneel, to wait for permission, to ask for approval before it dares to act. And yet, no matter how long it has waited, no matter how long you have ignored it, it is still yours. It hasn't abandoned you. It hasn't died. It is buried beneath the layers of stories you were told. That strength must look a certain way, that you must be ready before you begin, that peace comes from pleasing others. But the peace you've been chasing was built on lies. Because there is no peace in betrayal, no rest in submission, no balance in hiding. You are both the prison and the prisoner, and the key was always in your hand. But it is not found in waiting, not found in longing, not found in wishing for the fire to return on its own. The key is this: dare to act before you feel ready. Move even when you feel empty. Choose even when the weight tells you to stay still. And in that act, the will begins to rise. The strength you thought you lost begins to take shape again, not because you waited for it, but because you forged it with your own hand, and that hand has always been yours. So look down, at your feet. See the symbol that haunts every silent moment of your life. The rusted sword you forgot you carried. The weapon you begged the world to give you, not realizing it was always there, waiting for you to remember. You asked for protection, for power, for strength, but only your own hand can lift that sword. Only your own hand can claim what was never lost, only forgotten. If these words echoed something you felt but never named, if they broke through the silence you've carried for too long, I invite you, subscribe to this channel, not as another empty gesture, but as a choice. A choice to stay close to what helps you see clearly. And if this touched a place you've been afraid to look at, leave a comment. Share what this awakened in you. Because clarity isn't a gift, it's something you fight for. And now, it's time to decide. Will you lift that sword, or will you let it rust for another day?